Now, he says he's now left with a choice of waiting to die of natural causes or starving himself to death. Tony Nicklinson suffers from locked-in syndrome. His healthy mind is trapped inside a body which no longer functions. He wanted the law on murder to be changed so that doctors or loved ones could help him die. But today, the High Court ruled against him. The judges agreed a decision to allow the claim would have consequences far beyond the present case. They ruled it is not for the court to decide whether the law about assisted dying should be changed, and if so, what safeguards should be put in place. These are matters for Parliament to decide. Well, Tony Nicklinson says he's been left devastated and heartbroken, as I found when I went to meet him earlier. Tony Nicklinson has a lot to say about losing his legal battle, but with an active mind trapped in a body he's lost the use of, he has to rely on a specially adapted computer to voice his statement.
Judges, like politicians, are happiest when they can avoid confronting the real issues, and this judgment is not an exception to this rule. But unfortunately for me, it means yet another period of physical discomfort, misery and mental anguish while we find out who controls my life, me or the state.
If the computerised words sound unemotional, the outpouring of grief, broadcast live from the small, stuffy room that is his world, communicates his feelings eloquently. For 7 years now, Mr. Nicklinson has wanted to die. But because he was paralysed by a stroke, he can't physically kill himself. So he needed the High Court to change the murder laws, so a doctor helping him to take his own life humanely wouldn't be prosecuted. The High Court said that was a matter for Parliament, which leaves Mr. Nicklinson in despair. With the help of his wife Jane, letter by painful letter, he blinks out his thoughts on the politicians with whom his fate may now rest.
Letter C, letter O, letter, they're cowards. Because letter T, H, letter E, they're unduly influenced by letter, by minority. They're influenced.
I last met Mr. Nicklinson 2 months ago, just before he went to the High Court to ask for the right to end a life he no longer wishes to live. It was hard then to believe things could get any worse for him, but they have. Not just because of today's judgment, but because life as it is now even more painful. What does life mean for you? And this room really is your world, isn't it?
Letter I, letter C, A, letter N. I can't sit comfortably.
So he's more determined than ever to die.
He could actually starve himself. That would be possible, and I wouldn't be prosecuted or anything because it's his wish not to eat or drink. But it's a nasty way to go, and it's long and it's drawn out. Letter I, letter T, letter it's, letter T, H, letter D, letter. It's a choice of last, well, your last resort.
He's not quite ready to make that fatal choice, the only choice he has after today. And since on cost and comfort grounds he's ruled out making the grim pilgrimage to Switzerland, where assisted suicide is legal. First, he'll appeal the High Court judgment in the hopes that the Supreme Court will look more favourably on his plight. Tony, what would you say to the judge if he was here now?
Letter T, letter R, try living your life.
His message is simple if painful. Forget about legal precedent and constitutional significance. This is about one man who wants to control his life's end. Well, I'm joined now from their home in Wiltshire by Tony Nicklinson's wife, Jane, and with me in the studio is the former Justice Secretary, Lord Falconer, who chaired an independent commission on assisted dying. Well, Lord Falconer, let's start where my piece ended there, that ultimately the Nicklinsons aren't particularly bothered by legal precedent. What matters here is this is about one man who desperately wants the right to end a life which is causing him misery.
Yeah, and I'm very, very sympathetic to his position, but what he's asking is that somebody kill him. He's not asking to be assisted to commit suicide, and that's quite a step for the law to take. I'm very strongly in favour of changing the law to assist people to commit suicide, but Tony was asking for the courts to do something more, and he was in effect asking for the courts to fundamentally change the law of murder, which is very difficult.
Jane Nicklinson, let's address that point, that this would go way beyond Tony Nicklinson's individual case, and it would, by changing the law of murder, it would potentially put vulnerable people seriously at risk.
Well, we disagree with that. I mean, in fact, I think vulnerable people may be better protected. Every case would be taken individually. The person would have to ask, they would have to prove that they're of sound mind, be physically unable to do it themselves. It would be a lengthy, complicated procedure you would have to go through, and it would have to be approved by the courts before, you know, it could be carried out.
Lord Falconer and the Nicklinsons were trying to circumscribe this change so that, as Jane explained there.
I know what was being argued for in court was that if you weren't able to take your own life, the law should be changed so that the necessity of having somebody to help you would be a defence to murder. The way that the criminal law was always operated, if somebody intentionally kills you and it's not self-defence, then that's murder, because the law's always taken the view you shouldn't be allowing a situation where somebody's life is taken.
But couldn't those caveats that Jane Nicklinson was talking about there have been applied?
They couldn't be applied by the judges. Can't make this law. It's got to be made by Parliament. Even if Parliament was going to make a law, my own view is you should stop at assisting somebody to commit suicide. You shouldn't go to a point where you can actually take somebody else's life, which is what Jane is saying.
But Parliament has repeatedly refused to change the law on euthanasia, and beyond that, I mean, this is a murder law that was going to be changed. So despite the fact that in some polls 80% of the public would support legalising euthanasia.
If Parliament won't change the law, then the law can't be changed at the end of the day, because ultimately, before we take a step like this, we've got to have somebody who makes the decision about whether we have this fundamental change, and it's Parliament.
Jane Nicklinson, in your heart of hearts, you couldn't expect an unelected judge to overturn the will of Parliament.
Well, I'm sorry, I don't quite follow. Tony was very hopeful.
What I was saying was that, you know, a judge is not elected by the people. A judge would have had to have overturned the will of Parliament here. MPs and peers say they don't want the law to be changed. Ultimately, they're the people who have been elected, and we have to respect their judgment, don't we?
Yes, but it's not really a change in the law we're after. It's a different interpretation of a law that's already there. And also it's about Tony's rights as well. I think I'm right in saying that it's up to the judges to look after people's rights, and Tony's rights have been violated here. He, through no fault of his own, cannot take his own life. So why should everyone else be able to when he can't?
Lord Falconer, if Tony Nicklinson was just able to move his arm to place some pills in his mouth, he would be able to take his own life.
Yeah, and that would be, if the law was changed in the way that I would like, that would be absolutely fine. What Jane has always said to me, and she's been very clear about this, she's not making any comment about the law or anything like that. She's just saying, look at the situation of Tony, and you can see he's absolutely clear that he wants to die. What's the difference between taking your own life and somebody else doing it where it's absolutely clear, as in the case of Tony, that he wants to take his own life? And although I've spoken to Jane about this directly, it sounds very divorced in a way from Jane and Tony's situation. It is quite an important distinction, not necessarily to protect Tony, because Tony's clear that he wants to take his own life, but maybe for others.
Isn't there a strange contradiction in your position, though, that you, and through your commission, you support euthanasia for the terminally ill?
I don't support euthanasia, because euthanasia is ultimately somebody else taking your life.
Okay, assisted suicide.
Which is the key is that you take your own life, because that's a real protection.
But you support that for the terminally ill?
I do.
Some of whom may have a much better quality of life than Tony Nicklinson does.
But if part of it has got to be about the state protecting people from abuse, one of the great protections is ultimately it's you that take your own life rather than somebody else taking your life. Because if somebody else takes your life, then you're not the person ultimately in control of that last step.
But do you not accept that contradiction that some people who are terminally ill, actually at the point that they decide to take their own life, have a better quality of life than Tony Nicklinson does now?
Yes, I do accept that that will lead to cases where you're suffering much more when you're not terminally ill than when you are terminally ill. But there needs to be safeguards if you're going to allow people to assist somebody to kill themselves.
Jane Nicklinson, I hear that since we've come on air, a benefactor has offered to pay for your husband to travel to Dignitas in Switzerland where he could be assisted in taking his own life.
Yeah, so I believe, yeah.
What's your reaction to that?
I haven't really looked into it yet. It's incredibly kind of whoever it is. Tony doesn't want to go to Switzerland. I mean, maybe when we come to the end of the road that we really have no more appeals and we have nowhere else to go, if we still haven't succeeded, maybe he will think about it. But at the moment, he's determined to carry on fighting. He says he's getting to the point now where he really doesn't know how much longer he can go on for. And I hope that he can carry on with the fight, because I think it would be a real shame to stop now we've got this far.
And this is a mystery benefactor who's contacted you?
I'm not sure, to be honest. I've been so wrapped up with everything. I haven't heard what else has been going on, but I did hear someone mention it. I'm sure one of the girls will tell me about it soon, but I believe that's the case.
Jane Nicklinson, Lord Falconer, thank you very much. So what now for Tony Nicklinson's fight to die? You can read my blog on my meeting with him at channel4.com/news.